we're gonna start from your philosophical question.
Let's go.
And let's say like when to MCP and when not to MCP.
That's a great question. We should maybe define MCP first.
Yes.
MCP or Model Context Protocol it's a client-server protocol, like HTTP.
Yeah.
Where with HTTP, the client, a browser, connects to a server and says, "Hey server, give me a website," and the server sends the website. Right? Client server. MCP is the same. Where an MCP client like Claude, desktop, or even Claude, the regular app, or Cursor, Windsurf. When you open them, they connect to an MCP server. This is either hosted in the cloud or on the device. And they just register with the server. They say, "Hey server, it's model context protocol. What context do you have for my model?" And then the server says, "I have these tools that you can use. I have these prompts. I have these resources. I have all this bullshit." And then the client says, "Great." And so once that's established, anytime the model in that client needs to use a tool, it invokes the tool on the server side.
Yep.
That's MCP. So when to MCP, when not to MCP? You want always to MCP when you want to extend the capability of any AI application or language model. So for example, in my talk, I showed this demo of using an MCP server to manage my calendar from any MCP client. And then for me, really, I hate switching context. I'm sure you're an engineer.
Yep.
I think we all hate switching context. So if I'm deep writing some code and I get some email from some conference organizer saying, "Hey, your talk is in 20 minutes," I'm like, "Oh shit." But also, it would be cool if I could then quickly look at my calendar. Hey, is it really in 20 minutes, you know? And so in Cursor, which is an MCP client, it connects to my calendar over the tool exposed by the MCP server and says, your talk is at this time. In fact, in the near future, I will be proactively notified, not with some fucking thing popping up in the corner, but with an agent saying, like, "Just so you know, your talk is here."
And in the context in which you are at that moment.
Exactly. So it's not an interruption that steals focus and context. It enhances my context. And so you want to answer your question in the long. I have a podcast, man. I talk a lot. When to MCP, when not to MCP, is when an AI app, and I'm saying AI app, not language model, when an AI assistant does not have a capability that you want it to have. That's usually when you use MCP. And then you go look at a bunch of MCP servers that exist, maybe open source ones. Does Stripe have one?
Yes, we do have one. We just launched one for payments.
Congrats. So you find, is it open source?
It is semi-open source.
Okay, so you find one and use it. But I tell you what, if Stripe didn't have one, then I would go write it.
Exactly.
Anyone, and this is something I think people need to know, anyone can write an MCP server. As long as a service exposes an API, like an HTTP API, like Stripe, I can go make the Stripe MCP server. And if you're living I think this is a tip for people who are maybe living somewhere, or they may be not experienced, but they want a job, like at Stripe or at IBM or at whatever, or at Google, just make an MCP server that consumes their API and show it to people, and then they'll be like, "Oh, you want to just come work for us and maintain it?" And so anything that any MCP server can talk to any API and extend the capabilities of them. So to riff on this a little bit more, I care a lot about health and fitness. I use Strava. You use Strava?
Yeah, it's a lot used in Romania overall.
Right, so Strava is this like running app. And I would love my ChatGPT is also an MCP client, a very restricted one, but it is. And I would love to just open ChatGPT and be like, "Give me a workout for today." And then I wanted to, over MCP, talk to Strava and be like, "What has he done in the past few days?" And then to be like, "Actually, you trained too much, take a rest day." And it knows this because it gets context from my Strava MCP server that I can make because Strava exposes an API. Does it make sense?
Yep,
and
absolutely.
so when to MCP, when a tool doesn't have a capability that I want, I have the power to just manufacture that capability and then connect to it over MCP. Now,
I'm going to bring you back a little bit.
Thanks.
So if you think 35 years ago, web came out and then HTTP came out and nobody knew what the hell was happening, right? So now AIs came out and MCP came out. And pretty much the same thing applies. Like nobody really knows what MCP is about and you gave a good explanation and the context on it. But you're saying any app could expose an MCP, right? And server. How do you make sure that your app is secure while doing that? And how do you make sure you don't overly expose or underexpose the information that you want from that app?
Yeah, from the MCP server, you mean?
Yes.
Exactly the same way as you would expose information from an HTTP server. It's
Okay.
they're so similar. They're almost exactly the same. Actually they're similar even in that they communicate over TCP underneath. So they're the same. It's just HTTP is to transfer hypertext,
Yep.
and MCP is to transfer context to a model.
Okay.
But they're the same. It's just different purposes. So
Right.
so every rule that applies to an HTTP server applies to an MCP server.
Sweet. Okay. Still have some questions for you, but does anybody in the audience have some questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks. My question is, I tested MCP in Cloud Desktop, and now Cloud iPhone
the
app
web
also
app,
has it.
yeah.
Yeah, and I found it very fascinating. But the thing is that it starts doing things without being 100% transparent, because I always have to kind of open the details and see how did you actually name that event? What did you actually put in that Notion doc, right? So how do you see this challenge, and what do you think it's a risk, or do you think it's like solvable? Like, what's your take on it?
Good question. One, I just want to appreciate that you can expand the details and see, so that's already a step in the right direction. This is where, again, what I said about HTTP servers and MCP servers are, we need to carve that into a fucking stone tablet and make it the law, because you have exactly the same problem of unvalidated input in an HTTP server, right? What do? You do server-side HTTP validation. Somebody sends, the classic example of this is like SQL injection, right? Where there's a text input field, and some person is single quote, semicolon, and then drop table, right? And if you don't validate this on the server side, you're going to have problems. You need to do exactly the same thing with an MCP server, because MCP servers expose tools and prompts and other things, but if we're being honest, it's all about tools. All this other stuff is kind of bullshit. And I say that respectfully. I actually know the creator of MCP personally. David is a friend, and I don't think he would feel disrespected if I say it's all about tools. And so if you're just doing tools are functions, and what can functions do? They literally get inputs, they process the inputs and return an output. And so if a language model is coming up with some bullshit for your tool, then you as the author of the MCP server can validate that bullshit and prevent against it, right? So I think it's not really that big of a deal, provided we just treat it as zero privilege, secure engineering, like any other engineering we do.
So similar, let's then move a little bit into the future and
Yeah.
how the future would look like. So MCP, from what I'm understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you're seeing it as kind of the future of communication between models, agents, right? Then if we take one step further, do you think this is going to be something that is going to be a browsable library of MCP servers that you
exists.
just use on the market?
Yeah,
or
yeah.
is it going to be more oriented towards your local device?
Good question. That exists. So Anthropic has an MCP registry, and because capitalism and competition, GitHub has an MCP registry now also. So that exists. You can literally, like you find GitHub repos, you can find GitHub, MCP servers on GitHub. There's two runtimes for MCPs. I think this is what you were talking about. Because most MCP servers today are encouraged to run on your device. I think a good example of this is something called Playwright MCP. I don't know if you've seen this, right? But it's an MCP server that an AI app can use to control a locally running browser. So it can open a browser, go to a website. The language model decides which website, how do we go there, what password do we enter, all this. The Playwright team at Microsoft, they say, run this on your device. I say, why the fuck not run it in the cloud and offer it as a service? That makes way more sense. But a lot of the advice is run this only on your device because risks and security. Okay, but you can also host. So for example, I host all my MCP servers and run them in the cloud at scale. And I do it for me because I want to get this Strava workout advice from the MCP client on my phone and on my laptop. And if 11 Labs, I don't know if you know them, they do voice agents that also speak MCP. They're MCP clients. So I can just phone call my thing on 11 Labs and be like, should I work out today? Or use the app on my phone, or use ChatGPT on the web, and it still speaks to the same hosted fucking MCP. It just makes more sense to host MCP servers. So there's safety concerns, maybe. I haven't found them. I use them in production. I will say this, I have an assistant that just uses a fucking computer as me. reads my emails, my calendars, my social media, manages that shit if it can, and I just like speak things into existence. This exists. I use it today. I can show you.
Okay.
And I think that's really the use case for MCP is like you have one layer of context centrally hosted, and this gives context to any agent you use. There's another, just to wrap up, there's another app that was founded, a company founded by a 19-year-old. Absolutely bananas. It's called Super Memory. Have you heard of this?
Nope.
Some kid was like, what if I take a database, SQLite, Pinecone, Postgres, some database, and just expose that database over MCP so that I create user records that hosts all their context. And then they take this MCP server to like Claude or OpenAI or whatever, and then any language model just knows who you are and knows your preferences. So he built this startup. It's called supermemory.ai. Crazy investment, doing well, you know, because that's the purpose. I think MCP is a great way to give shared context to anyone.
Nice. So, can you repeat the name of the company?
Supermemory. Yeah.
.ai.
Supermemory.ai.
If anyone wants to check it out. Also, any more questions from the public?
I have no affiliation to Supermemory, by the way. I would like to, if you want to invest.
If not, I do have a follow-up question on something you were just saying.
I have also
So
a
quick
big thought.
Wait for this one. You did said about errors, right?
Yeah.
How do you actually handle errors when MCP tools come into play? Like if something goes wrong along the workflow, how do you recover? How do you pivot in that workflow?
Very good question. Very good question. This draws on something a dear friend of mine is very, very passionate about called agent experience, AX. Matt Bildman over at Netlify, the CEO, he's making the case that agent experience or AX is like the future of everything. And what he means by AX is, have you used Claude Code? So it's command line LLM, right?
Yep.
Like it can execute commands on your computer. Some command line programs are interactive. They just stop and wait for you to type something. But an agent can't do that.
Right.
So that's poor AX. Similarly, some command line programs just fail with some fucked up error that's not actionable. And then like Claude Code will just panic and try in a loop. And so AX is optimizing for when an agent calls your tool, with or without MCP, what experience is the agent going to have? Is it going to be one they can recover from? Or is it going to be one where they panic and try like a million different other calls, right? And so to answer your question, when an error happens in a tool, it's a question of AX, and how you solve it is up to you. So what I do personally, immediately log that to Sentry and notify me.
Okay.
Second, and I love Sentry, I must say that. And then second, depending on the type of tool, I will just return plain English. Either this isn't available, stop trying, try later, or something like that. And then what's going to happen is the LLM will take that natural language error and then relay it to the user, and the user is aware. You know, if it's an error you can recover from, then you describe the recovery steps also in plain English to the LLM. Hey, your tool, your princess is in a different castle. You have the wrong tool. Try this one. And so you optimize for like, what is the LLM going to do, as opposed to, because historically in programming, web programming, we throw errors. And these errors are for humans. Usually, like there's some code that humans can read. It's exactly that, but now for machines.
Fair enough. And then an interesting question comes as an afterthought to that. You talk about AX and agent experience, but in UX we do a lot of research and then feedback gathering in order to figure out how to iterate on that. Do you imagine a world where your consumers, your tool's consumers, are going to give you feedback as they consume you?
Yeah, they already do, right? Like what I meant with Sentry.
Right.
That's feedback right there. They'll try to call a tool, it will fail, send it to Sentry.
Would that be, so if I am hosting a tool, right, like pull together a tool, currently if another person consumes my tool, I'm not going to actually get the feedback from that, right? They get the feedback on how they're consuming my tool and how they can pivot.
Get the feedback.
But how do they route it over to me?
Well, your tool is a function that you write.
Yes, but I make that available on one of the repositories, on one of the registries, right?
But in your function, you have a catch, try catch.
Yes.
And in catch, you catch the exception, and you sentry.log exception. And this goes to your Sentry account.
Oh, but you see, there's a difference between crashing, and I don't know what to do in my tool, and the tool responded with a response from my perspective, but the response for the orchestrator doesn't make sense.
Interesting. Okay, so you're saying the MCP client doesn't know what to do with the response.
Exactly.
So it's outside a layer of your control.
Exactly. Exactly. So similar to UX, right? You go and do research for a month.
Yeah.
You build a workflow, amazing workflow. You put it in front of your clients, and they get lost.
Yeah.
We're gonna do
That's
similar
good.
things. We're
That's
gonna
good.
put out a tool out there. We worked out all the edge corners, and then the orchestrator, the server, tries to use it and use it wrong.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you imagine a world where we're gonna get a feedback loop on our tools for that?
It's a very good question. I think yes. There's LangFuse. Have you heard of? So
Nope.
there's tools like LangFuse, LangWatch, Lang some other shit. Like I hope we get more creative with when. But LangFuse is one of these. There's these new platforms that are Arise, for example, is another one. Although Arise is a little bit more towards machine learning workloads.
Okay.
There's tools that will take basically a massive dump. Not in the way that you're thinking, but we'll
Let's
take
put that as a highlight for the conference for everyone watching.
yeah. There's tools that take a massive dump. Some people have called me a tool that. Anyway, no, they take a massive dump of everything that happens. So from the time of prompt to the tool calls, to the tool call responses, to what the orchestrator has done. Big snapshot, and stores them in the tools. LangFuse is one of them. And so I think through tools like this, even as a developer of the MCP server, you'll
Nice.
be able to receive that feedback.
Oh, that would be cool. So you would go to a centralized place where you can start browsing to the feedback you get for your MCP tool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And I mean, as a bonus, you could just make a tool on your MCP server, send feedback. You know, and so when the orchestrator fails, then the user can be like, tell the developer.
That should be in the MCP protocol itself.
Yes. Yes. Andrea.
Hi.
Hi.
So I have a question which is very similar, I think, to what you asked. And
Then
it's
why are you
more
asking again?
because I want to ask you tough questions because you didn't know how to answer the first one. So it's more about observability of the MCP performance at scale when you start to have users for the tools that you're building. So like you said, how do you catch the errors that are not necessarily crashes? They are just random errors that some user will tell you that something didn't work. So you have, yes,
Yeah.
you use LangFuse, but how does that work with MCP?
The good news is that we have a pipeline directly to the MCP creator himself.
Yeah. we can- David, what's the answer? So let me see if I understand this question. How does it tie into MCP? Is that your question? I mean, MCP to MCP servers. They're just servers. You know, that's kind of what I don't get. They're just so. In terms of observability, it's uptime, right? Is the server on or off, right? Is the server under load? How are we doing on RAM and CPU? But these are just regular observability. I think the reason I'm having a hard time parsing this question is because I think we're maybe drawing too much of a difference between MCP servers and HTTP servers, when really servers are just servers. And so all the things you know about observability for HTTP servers, they just translate cleanly. The only thing that doesn't translate is what you mentioned, which is what happens if the app, the client app, Cursor, Claude, if they don't know how to process an output. But this is outside the scope of my MCP server, right?
Mhm.
It's in the user land.
That's
and
correct.
so that's really a problem with the people making the MCP client. It's not even my server at that point, you know? So I hope that helps, but I don't really have a better answer than that.
Yeah, no worries. And on the traceability part, though, and I'm going to pass it over to you in a second, Alex. On the traceability part, are you able, and this is me being ignorant right now, are you able to know what tools in what order have been involved in order to come to your outcome, to your final outcome?
Yes, yeah, that definitely. Yeah. So if you look at a chain of, like a conversation with a language model, tool calls are nothing more than just text. They're just JSON, which is so language models output JSON. And so this is what a conversation with an LLM would look like. You have me sending a message, hi, and the LLM sending a message, text, like, hi, can I help you? Then I say, use a tool to use a browser. And then what the LLM, you look at the LLM response, it's no longer text, it's JSON. And it's literally name of function, arguments to function. And then the app that uses the LLM parses that and calls the function either in a remote server or locally. And whatever that function returns is another object in this conversation chain, JSON object, saying the function, this function was called with these arguments and gave this output.
Nice.
And then the LLM responds with text afterwards. So the chain is text, text, JSON, JSON, text.
And all of that is then traceable to
It's a
figure
big
out
dump.
what happened.
It's a big dump, exactly. Yeah.
Thanks. So you mentioned quite a lot of times that it's really similar to HTTP, right? So what's the difference between MCP and just dumping my API documentation into the context of an LLM? So what are
Dumping your what?
my API documentation into the
Yeah.
context of an LLM?
That's an awesome question. That's a really good question. There's many, many, many layers to this. And I think on the surface, you can do that. You can just be like, here's the Swagger or Open API specification for my API to something like Cursor, and it's like, now use it to call it. I think it's just, that's way less deterministic. You have like almost no control, because what if it calls those endpoints with something you don't expect? Or what if it doesn't even know? One cool thing with MCP and tools in general is that agents know which tool to pick based on the tool's description. And sometimes the tool's description may be different from an API endpoint's description. You know what I mean? And so in this case, that's really the case for MCP, is you want this difference. You want a semantic difference between your API, which is usually for developers and applications, and your MCP server, which exposes tools that are described with natural language, including the rules of those tools and the schema. So with MCP servers, you can also specify with a Zod schema, only accept these inputs and those outputs. And like an open API, like YAML file, has no way of enforcing that. And so it's a matter of like fine-grained control and determinism. And you could do that, but it's sort of like using a serrated knife versus using a scalpel. Yeah.
Okay, let's take one last question, Tejas. For all of our watchers that come from the enterprise sector,
Yeah.
how ready is MCP to be deployed in enterprise at scale? And when should you start thinking about that?
Enterprise at scale. I mean, it's ready. Like, in some ways,
There is a lot of fear, uncertainty, doubt
Why?
about opening your MCP servers for consumption. And I can say that even from a perspective of Stripe, it took us quite some time in order to open up our APIs over SAP, and it just happened like 2 days ago.
right, but that's not in enterprise, right? That's more you're offering it to the public.
Yes.
So maybe I misunderstand. Do you mean like for internal enterprise stuff, or
No, no. To offer your enterprise services to the public.
Oh, yeah. Okay. No, that's
Sorry.
definitely very scary. I think I actually don't know. This is a good question. I would be curious to hear from you what Stripe's matrix was, but I don't. Yeah, I don't know.